Hey, folks, welcome back to the H3O podcast. I am here again, Joel Rather, your host. Excited today, as always. I think I say that every podcast to have on another guest. Today is pretty cool because we have one of our staff members, our resident academic guy, I guess you could call him. I call him our chief of science, our data collector, and also just so happens to be a very avid bow hunter. We talked a little bit offline before we jumped live on here today. We have Andy Wolfe on the show. Andy is part of our team, and we behind the scenes we have been doing a lot. Well, he's been doing a lot. I usually just kind of shake my head and go, okay, yeah, that sounds cool. With regards to some stuff that we're going to go over today, we're going to talk a lot about some of the things that we've been doing over the last couple years to give you guys better information on what does Western big game hunting look like and how are we as Hunt Hike Harvest bringing new kind of science and education into the forefront of Western big game hunting. So Andy, how are you, brother? Good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I'm doing well today. Thanks for having me on. Um, yeah, I feel like we've been trying to plan this out for quite some time, and
Yes.
I'll be the one to admit my schedule does not permit much room, much wiggle room. So I'm happy that we were finally able to connect on this.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and
as you can see,
yeah,
the difference is I'm here in my H3O t-shirt in our podcast room, just kind of chilling, drinking my coffee. I mean, you got
yeah,
coffee too, but
I got the
you can
coffee.
you
Yeah.
can see he's in, an office. He's got all these books and stuff behind him. You can see the brain waves are really flowing over there, and
Yeah,
I'm
what you
just
don't see is it's kind of a mess back here, but like even up here, it's even more messy. So yeah, the mess is what keeps me so stinking preoccupied. But the mess is good, and like you kind of said, it's a behind the scenes mess that I'm so excited to be a part of. I think it was about 2 years ago that we were able to
yeah,
connect, and then since then I have been able to so thankfully help out with data collection, help out with data analysis, help out with some of the education pieces, help with
yeah,
almost deciphering some of the information that comes from so
yeah,
much of what happens within H3O and within just the hunting world in general from a physiological standpoint.
yeah.
And really, that's what I love to do. I love to be the behind the scenes data guy that is able to provide you with the information that you need in order to take it forward and run. So um,
Yeah.
thanks for having me. First off, thanks for having me on this team, and second off, just like thanks for having me on today. And man, I'm excited to continue on with our work that we've been doing.
Yeah, well, let's start off. I think it's important. Number one, I think one of the things that we have continually tried to tell people as we engage folks, in some of our event series stuff with our friends at Western Hunt Fest. We were at Outdoorsman Days this year. We were at the Mile High Fishing and Hunt Expo. And we constantly run into people like, I'm like, what do you guys do? Like, what do you guys are about? What are you guys about? And the big thing for us is we are continually trying to solidify to people the difference in some of the things that you see right now in the industry, right? There's some other players in the training space, if you will, right? And for us, the biggest separator, we talk a lot about separators. And by that, what I'm saying is like what separates you from others that are either in a similar space, that are in, your kind of area as far as whether that's business or background or whatever else. And so for us, that has been a really important and critical aspect of how we've developed the people that are on our team and getting people to really understand what it is that makes us maybe a little bit different than others. And, I hate to say like better, right? But
Hey,
ultimately at
yeah,
the end of,
just say what it is, Joel. I mean, it
but
is
but
what
at
it
the
is.
end of the day,
Yeah.
here's what it is, right? And so if you've watched our podcast before, you've heard me talk about my background, you know, 25 years in professional strength and conditioning, bachelor's and master's degree. I've written books. I've got another book coming out right now. Done research, trained people at all levels and, professional sports and all this and that and da 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 da. And we created H3O from a standpoint of we wanted to bring that level of expertise into the hunting world, and that there is a heck of a lot more to being fit and being prepared and understanding the physical requirements to get out and do some of these high altitude big game hunts, whether that's elk, deer, moose, whatever that might be, right? Like I did a mountain goat hunt this year, and utilizing our backgrounds to better prepare people. So I want to start, it's a really long lead up, but I want people to understand like what I'm talking about and why you're part of this team. So let's begin there so that people understand like what is your background? What do you currently do? And we'll kind of jump off from there.
Yeah, so I'm an associate professor at Tarleton State University, which is it's a Division I school, kind of not necessarily a huge school, but we're about 18,000 students down in southwest of Dallas Fort Worth area. I serve here. Might be some new news to you, Joel, but I serve as our interim department chair for the Department of Health and Human Performance. Took the department chair role on this fall. And then I also serve as the laboratory director for the Kinetic Performance Lab. Within the Kinetic Performance Lab, just a quick overview, we work on, I guess, the overarching, broad topic of what we do in there is innovative methods of strength conditioning. So we look at, hey, what works within the strength conditioning world, and how can we continue to expand what we know about training, and what pieces of program design work, and then how can we modulate what we've done in the past to advance adaptation further. So that's what we do within that lab setting. Regarding a little bit of my past, same type of education as Joel. Bachelor's, master's in exercise science, kinesiology. Doctorate degree. I went into educational leadership and policy study with the doctorate degree, with kind of a cognate area, all in exercise science again. And that's lended me into the professor position that I'm in right now, and then also in the position with Joel. So with H3O, and so a lot of what I do is exercise science research now, and obviously teaching that at the university setting, and publishing that in various reputable journals. And so that's a little bit of the academic history of myself. On the hunting side, which I think is where this becomes really unique, is so Joel expressed to you guys, he's got this 25 years of strength conditioning, and then he's also an avid hunter. Well, I kind of sit in the same boat. I'm a couple years behind Joel. I've probably got 15 years in exercise science research world. But I've been an avid hunter since I was, oh gosh, I think I picked up my first bow when I was probably 6 years old. I think that's what it was. I was 6 or 7. My dad bought me a old bear compound bow. And I can remember in the backyard, he was like, "Well, let's set you something up and let's shoot a little bit." And we went and got an old hay bale, right? And some spray paint. You spray paint the hay bale, create a couple of rings, and man, I would spend hours in the backyard just slinging arrows at a hay bale. And that led to obviously some hunting, and I think I harvested my first whitetail deer. So being from Texas, I've done a lot of whitetail hunting. Harvested my first whitetail, I think, whenever I was 10. Did dove hunting prior to that, and then I actually switched over. I switched away from rifle hunting and started bow hunting whenever I was 12 years old. And I started bow hunting whenever I was 12, and since then I've gone on several excursions that have been amazing experiences. So it's it's lended me the ability to go and see some amazing
Well,
places
you're
and
gonna if
see
you're
it
gonna bring
outdoors.
it up, you might as well share. I mean,
All right, all right.
let's
Well,
talk
so
let's talk about these amazing.
so Joel gets to poke at me because he gets to hunt elk every year, but I get to poke at Joel because I've had the opportunity to travel to Africa on 3 different excursions. So
Yeah,
I've been on 3 different safaris in Africa. Um, eh, I think let's see here, been to South Africa primarily, Botswana, are basically the 2 countries that I've been to, Tanzania as well. So that's a little further north. But from there, I've been able to bow hunt and I've taken probably close to 15 or 20 African species, from blue wildebeest, to klipspringers, your standard impala, blesbuck, those types of animals. And uh, I tell you what, that hunting is, if you have never experienced it, it's worth pinching pennies, putting the money away, and going over there and experiencing that culture and experiencing that type of hunting. There's nothing like it. There's really nothing like it.
so
To have
so
to have 50 different species,
right,
in one field at one time is just
yeah,
it's you're in a it,
it's a
it's
whole other world.
it's a whole nother world. It really
Yeah.
is. But
Well, we I just talked with Dan Gates, and for those of you that maybe don't know Dan Gates, hopefully you do know who Dan Gates is. Dan has been spearheading and leading the charge with Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management, and obviously Proposition 127 that's coming up here in Colorado, with the Mountain Lion Initiative, and we hope the lack thereof, as outdoorsmen and hunters. Dan just got back, and we had a big talk where he had bought an African hunt a couple years ago, and then COVID came along and this and that, and the place that he had purchased the hunt from, honored his reservation and everything else. And so he's been on like close to 100 podcasts in the last year, obviously carrying the torch for, trying to make sure that us as outdoorsmen and outdoorswomen show up this fall. But it was really cool to listen to him talk, and I've listened to you talk about it, and just kind of just the how those hunts are structured, and the way with which, yeah, like you said, you just have this like crazy, like unimaginable opportunity that just doesn't exist here, for the most part in North America anyway, as far as being able to potentially see that many different types and kinds of animals, as well as then still have and have the ability to also harvest some of them. So yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit. I did have one question, which is, did you, out of those 15, did you harvest a common reed buck?
I did.
Did you?
What?
Okay.
No, no, sorry, no, not a common reed buck. I've not harvested a common reed buck. I've harvested a mountain reed buck.
Okay.
So a
Because
little bit
we had
different.
we had a one of our former athletes here at Fast Performance in freaking Denver, Colorado, where H3O headquarters is. I have a kid that him and his dad have done hunts all over the place. They've fly fished in South America. I mean, like, you name it. This kid like has lived the dream as an outdoorsman. He's done
Mhm.
more than I'll ever do in my lifetime by the time he graduated high school. And he holds the world record for the common reed buck.
That's incredible.
And it's a really cool story because when they were down on that hunt, they, similar to what you said, had the opportunity to take a few different animals. They saw reed buck. He actually missed one, and then the next day they happen to find another one, and he ends up harvesting it, and come to find out that that was a blessing in disguise that he missed, because then the one that he ended up actually getting was a world record. So when he came back, he ended up going to like SHOT Show or one of those ACSIs or whatever somewhere, and he got presented with like a world record plaque from Jim Shockey at one of these shows. So
No,
yeah,
I'm very pleased, and I love my trophies. I have several mounts of my trophies, and touch on the part of trophies here in just a second. But
yeah,
Man, uh, I don't have anything that's in the. I don't think I have anything that's in the top 50. I mean, I have some that are ranked decently within, Roland Ward and some of those books, but I think out of everything that we've harvested, I think my dad ended up harvesting he my dad harvested a rhino. He doesn't have all of his big five, but he harvested a rhino one trip when we were over there, and I think I want to say it's probably number 46 in the world, which is, I mean, it's still good.
Sure.
Um, but that's probably the closest I've gotten to like
Yeah.
high rankings over there. But
So one
again,
of the things
again,
that Yeah, so one of the things that I think, especially when you talk about these types of hunts, and we're gonna kind of slow roll our way into all the good stuff here, but it's always
yeah,
fun to tell hunting stories. So I like to just let the conversation find itself a little bit here. Is I want to like talk to people or talk to you about giving people a better understanding of like what that looks like when you're down
mhm,
there, because I think that you kind of dabbled a little bit with that moniker of trophy hunting and this and
mhm,
that, right?
yep,
And especially in African hunts and things like that, it gets a pretty black eye on what that means and why are all these animals being harvested and so on and so forth. But I really think it's absolutely critical, and we're going to have a podcast coming up with Robbie Kroger from Blood Origins. He's from South Africa, I believe, and there's so much misinformation and misunderstanding about what those hunts
mhm,
look like and then what happens after you actually harvest an animal down there. Talk a little bit about that,
yeah.
because I think this is such a critical part of people understanding that it's they're not just shipping you the horns back and all that kind of stuff and you're like, oh cool, check this out, I have my mounts here, and everything got from there was wasted. Just touch on that a little bit, because I think it's important for people to understand.
Yeah, so I think there's three pieces that really go into that question, right? And so we kind of have an outline of a direction of where I'd like to talk about here in that for that question. And the first one is we mentioned it earlier. Whenever you go to Africa, you're presented with an extravagant experience where you're able to see 20, 30 different species in one field, right? And whenever we look across that field of African animals, because there's so many different species and there's so much open area, one of the things that we have to do to ensure that those species continue on is we have to practice quality conservation. So that's the first part that I want to talk about whenever I dive into this is the conservation aspect of this.
Hmm.
So conservation versus preservation is really important here, right?
Right.
The second piece is um, the, the second piece of this is no no animal goes or no piece of the animal that you harvest is it goes unused,
Yep.
right? So no piece of that animal goes unused. So
Yeah.
that's the
It's not
second
it's not
piece.
getting thrown in a burn hole somewhere.
Correct. Yeah, so that's the second piece. And then the third piece to this is um it's pretty dear to my heart, and it may be difficult to completely talk about, but I'll do my best. But if you're an outdoorsman or outdoorswoman, you know that hunting, almost everybody I know loves to go hunting, not necessarily by themselves, but with other people. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the third part that I'd like to talk about within answering this question. And we'll talk about more of the experience that comes from the social aspect of hunting, and taking some of these trips. So back to the first part of conservation. Um, I've been a part of, gosh, for a long time. I've been a part of the Dallas Safari Club. I don't know if I'm not a current member right now, but I've always kind of been a part of the Dallas Safari Club. My oldest brother was a president of the Dallas Safari Club at one point in time. And that's kind of how we got into some of the big game hunting over in Africa. And there was one particular convention that I was at, and at this convention, and at most hunting conventions, they'll auction off hunts, right? And one of the auction items was a black rhino. And Joel, you may remember this because it really hit the headlines of,
Yeah.
wait a minute, we're auctioning off a black rhino. Well, within African species, there's two types of rhinos, right? Within African species of rhino, Indian species of rhino is a little bit different, but African species of rhinos, they have the black rhinoceros and then they also have the white rhinoceros. The white rhinoceros, the population of it is pretty high. That it's doing well. There's plenty of species within Africa. Plenty for that particular. There's plenty of numbers of white rhinoceros species in Africa. So population's doing pretty good. Conservation methods have been good. Black rhinoceros, however, was one of the animals that was in the past, like, and I'll say it, in the past, it was harvested entirely too frequently for the purpose of the trophy and for the
Yeah.
purpose of obtaining the horn and using
Yeah.
the horn to make monetary gains.
And we're
um,
talking substantial money.
Substantial money, right? And those are, and that's probably dates back to the early 1900s, whenever the black rhinoceros
Yeah.
population started to
Yeah.
decrease because
And
of
most of that from
unethical.
poaching.
But yeah, and I
Yes.
wanted to say that. That's what I was getting ready to say. Most of
Yeah.
that from unethical hunting,
Yeah.
right? So there's a difference in ethical hunting and unethical hunting. And unethical hunting is harvesting for the purpose of trophy and trophy only,
Yeah.
right? So, and we'll get a little bit more of that into the step two here. But so the black rhinoceros is actually an endangered species, right? Right. So there are some, but there's not as many. Well, at the Dallas Safari Club several years back, they were auctioning off a black rhino hunt, and I thought to myself, okay, wait, how is this? How is this working? How is this possible? They go to
Right.
auction this sucker off, and first bids come in at $100,000. Right? If you know anything about Dallas Safari Club, those they got deep out pockets up there, right? And so $100,000. All right, the auctioneer goes off, 120, 120, all right, 120, 130, 150, right? And this sucker's everybody's bidding on this black rhino hunt.
You're like going like
And,
this.
yeah, and I'm sitting here like, I don't think I'll ever see that much money in my life. But go
Right.
for it, guys. Yeah,
Yeah.
good on you. I want to say, don't quote me on the price, but I want to say that this thing auctioned off for over $400,000. Right? So this black rhino hunt auctions off for $400,000. And what made the news was endangered African species gets auctioned off for $400,000 to,
Right. Yeah.
greedy, hunters
Classic
that.
media spin.
Yes, right. And they failed to mention why it was actually auctioned off. And the
Of course.
reason that this black rhinoceros was being auctioned off, it was for conservation purposes. There was a particular region in Africa, and there was a hunting organization in Africa that was helping out with one of the public access areas that's trying to regrow this population of black rhinos and reestablish it in this region. And there was one black rhino in particular that was an older male, extremely aggressive male
Right.
that over the past couple of years had been attacking younger black rhinos, males, females, and babies, and had harmed some of those individuals, some of those rhinoceroses, to the point where that some of them actually died. And so the conservation effort was to harvest just one problem black rhino that was actually
Hindering.
causing the herd to decline,
Yeah.
right? And so whenever we look at this thing with conservation and this thing with harvesting animals, that is what happens quite frequently within species is the older, more mature, it's kind of like us old cranky guys, right? We get
Yeah.
old and cranky and we don't care for the young bucks anymore. And
Yeah.
we end up jeopardizing the species being part of the species ourselves. And
Right.
so it was auctioned off at $400,000. The individual pays the price. He goes over there. He harvests the black rhino. He catches a bunch of slack for it.
Of course.
But the other part that's interesting is the black rhinoceros herd starts to increase and it's thriving very well now. And then on top of that, that $400,000, yes, a portion of it went to the hunting organization that helped him harvest that. So let's say it was $50,000 that went to that hunting organization that
Right.
went to feed those peoples that are in the organization, and also the trackers, the spotters, the
Yeah.
skinners that are all in our world extreme poverty stricken, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So $50,000 goes to them, and then the other 350 goes directly back into conservation efforts within that region.
yeah.
So when we talk about what's happening when we go over there for hunting purposes, you don't just get to go rummaging around the bush with an assault rifle and take out anything and everything. No, everything
Right.
is very planned. It's very structured. The guides know exactly what animals you're supposed to be harvesting out of that herd to
Yeah.
continue to have a good quality number of species. And sometimes having too many species is actually detrimental for that species, or it's detrimental. Like I said earlier, we have 30 species in one particular area. Well, if it's overrun with lions, guess what, guys? You're not going to have very many impala left
Right.
because they're going to kill them all. So we have to talk about the balance of species, and that's what us as hunters are able to provide. That's what us as humans understand, is that
Yep.
this balance of species, especially in an African terrain, right, where there's so many species, it is necessary to maintain that good quality number of animals within that species.
For
So
sure.
that's part number one. I'll probably pause for a second, Joel, and let you interject.
No, you keep on
Yeah.
rolling, dude. I mean, this is great, this is exactly kind of what I wanted to touch on because I feel like again, it is you gave a lot of examples in there, especially the media based kind of spin on these things, and obviously it becomes super challenging because we cannot control the narrative from external and from third party sources of how they're going to kind of view it, and then more importantly, how are they going to portray it, or how are they going to then convey it back out into a public um thread or medium. And the hard part with that is, and we're seeing it now, and I mentioned Colorado and Proposition 127, and I think as outdoorsmen, and as I mentioned, Dan Gates, who, I have so much respect for, in really, you want to talk about just carrying the burden and the load of being like this man standing on a mountain who's trying to get everyone else to like join in the fight. Dan has just taken this thing head on with, just huge shoulders, and tried to utilize exactly what we're talking about to disseminate between fact and fiction, misconstruing information, creating better resources for people to understand better. I've seen so many like positive correlators to having these types of discussions, and you have to understand that you aren't going to win in every regard. But I was on iHunt Colorado this week, for example, and a guy on there shared a story about the fact that he is an avid outdoorsman hunter, and in his workplace there was a coworker who was vegan.
Oh,
Okay. And you're like, whew, yeah, like
okay.
usually people go like, "Oh man, vegan, right? Da da da, right?" Like my sister-in-law, she's vegetarian, right, or vegan, or however you categorize, right? Believe it or not, we still can like be in the same room together. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
And he begins to tell a story of how this particular coworker goes, "Hey, I don't understand what this Proposition 127, like it's really confusing to me." And I think that is the other part that happens when a lot of this message and stuff and all these outlets with where we can find information get really diluted and oftentimes blurred because the goal is to try and get people into a camp, one camp or to the other, right? And the guy tells a story about how he then proceeds to say, well, this is what it's really about. And this is, what we know from facts. There's been Colorado Parks and Wildlife that have come out and they've recently said, hey, we are not in support of this because we know based on all of our wildlife biologists what this is going to mean for the future, right? And so to me, I think what you're touching on with a lot of that stuff and this particular case, especially when you talk about, I mean, just you almost even in saying like as soon as you said like black round, I'm like, ooh, yikes, right? Like you get this like internal like guttural kind of response where you're like, ooh, man, because you know that on the other side of that fence, there's going to be that in opposition. People are going to go, oh my gosh, like this is horrific. Like why in the world, right? But then you're like,
Why would you harvest this
yes,
endangered, almost extinct species?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And then it's
yeah.
like, hold on. But I think this is where I try to have these conversations where I know what I feel, what I think, what I believe, and everything else, right? And I try to
Mhm.
make sure that from an informed perspective, you don't get. I think it's easy, and what I've said a lot in these cases, whether we're talking about current proximity to me with Prop 127 or within safari based hunting like what you're talking about right now,
Mhm.
is separating emotion from all of this, right? Which is like our feelings and this and that about all these these issues, and go, tell me more about factual data. Tell me more about
Yeah.
things that are not subjective in nature but objective in nature, that we know from professionals, that we know from wildlife people, that we know from conservationists, from folks that can say, no, 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 it's okay for you to have an opinion and we don't have to agree, but here's what we know to be true that is not an arguable point, right?
Here's what the data suggests,
Yeah.
and that's where I I navigate it through a lot of it, and I come to that very common conclusion of, hey, what does the data suggest? Like
Yeah.
I may think this, but how can I look at this objectively instead of subjectively, and then come up with a decision that is objective, that makes good logical sense, that's rationalized through some sort of data driven decision, and
Yeah.
it's not just based off of, well, I don't think I don't want to see a poor animal suffer. Well, look, man, no hunter on the planet wants to see a poor animal suffer either. Like
No.
we can all gravitate towards that. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
absolutely.
I, I
Like
I struggle with it all the time. Like
yeah, and
I
I think that part of it is I think like you said, like everything, a lot of things get blurred whenever um, non-hunters are asked to explain their perception of hunters, and ruthless, mean, inhumane people. And it's, look, I could almost guarantee you I probably know more about animals than most of them, and I could almost guarantee you that I care more about animals than most non-hunters do.
yeah.
I mean, I have spent so many years in the woods that there's not another place that I'd rather be, and to sit in the woods at times and just sit back and enjoy the beauty of, when
Oh,
my area, enjoy the beauty of watching, Central Texas, right? You watch 20, 30 deer, just in enjoy the morning, and they run around and they skip around, and you have the fawns that are out there, playing, and they're all, corralled around maybe your feeder, that brings them to you. And there's plenty of times whenever I've sat back and said, man, I just want to enjoy the morning and watch wildlife.
yeah, for sure.
And if it's not the right, if it's not the right time for harvest, look, we know that. Ethical hunters know that.
Yeah.
And if it's not the right, if it's not the right particular animal for harvest, we know when to do it, when to harvest and when not to harvest.
Sure.
So I think that good quality hunters are the ones that are continuing to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll go on to my second point, if you don't mind, in regards to the
For sure.
African hunting, and then, what does this look like? What does it look like when we go over there? So we explained a little bit of the conservation, but and I briefly touched on how this also affects the economy of those regions. So I I know that not everybody's going to understand what the economy of African countries looks like, but I think that most of us have seen some form of a commercial to where we have seen individuals that suffer from lack of food, lack of resources, lack of
Sure.
shelter, lack of modern
Water.
medicine, right? The
Yeah.
modern world that we get so accustomed to here in the United States is not the same over there.
No.
And so every single excursion that I've been on, every safari that I've been on, you have a professional hunter, you have a PH, um, and then underneath that PH, you have a handful of other workers that gain a monetary profit off of the hunt that occurs, right? So we pay the PH, we pay we pay a fee for the animals, we pay a day rate for the animals, we pay for our food, right? So it generates a substantial amount of money for that professional hunter. The professional hunter then has to pay his essentially, his subcontractors, if you will.
Sure.
And those subcontractors may be your tracker, they may be your skinner, they may be an additional guide. And a lot of those individuals, that's what they base their livelihood off of. That money that they get from the hunting industry is what pays for their livelihood. It's what pays for their families to have food on the table, right?
Yeah.
So that's an economical piece that's very, very important for that region, and it's very important for a lot of regions within Africa to have that hunting continue from an economic standpoint. The second part of this is every single animal, every single animal that is harvested in Africa, every single one is eaten, right? So I don't care if it's a rhino, like we talked about a second ago.
Yep.
I don't care if it's a standard Impala slash Blesbuck, which by the way is phenomenal meat, right? Love
Hmm.
every bit of it. And I don't care if it goes all the way down to a jackal, right? Which a jackal is like the American version of a coyote, right?
Except
All of the
bigger.
meat, all of the meat is eaten, every
Yep.
bit of it, right? So if if we as hunters don't eat it, which we won't, we're not going to eat every piece of the meat that's harvested there, right? We may eat bits and pieces of the animals that are harvested, right? And they cook that for us. And oh, there's another economical benefit of it. Now we have to hire cooks. Perfect, right? So, but the meat that we don't eat, it gets a lot of the times shipped out to individuals that are not as fortunate, individuals that don't have the ability to pay for food. We end up being the ones that feed them, right? So I go over
Yeah.
there and I harvest 10 animals. I may eat a portion of one, but then uh, those other 9.5 get shipped out to families that are in need of food, that are in need of
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah.
So it goes far beyond this idea of, oh, you're just over there trophy hunting. It, do we bring back trophies? Yes, and I'll touch on that in a second. Yes, absolutely. But the other part of it is, look, it's an additional way for American individuals to go and help in an area that
Yeah.
is less fortunate. Uh,
You're essentially providing a service almost to some level, which is
mhm.
you're supplementing them economically, right? Like you're paying money, which is usually relatively substantial, right? Like these
Mhm.
are not
It
cheap.
is
They're not cheap endeavors, right?
correct.
So you're making a pretty heavy investment to go do this as the individual, but it begins the cycle, as you said, of all of these things, which is supplementing individuals and entities economically. It is also helping with providing them with sustenance in terms of the meat that it is going to provide to people who maybe do not
Mhm.
have the ability or means to be able to feed themselves or their families, those types of things. I've heard so many stories about um, you know, harvesting a large animal like, a hippo or even an elephant or whatever, and how like that will feed an entire tribe of people that don't have the means to be able to collect enough food or find enough food for a large amount of people, right? And
And a
then,
large amount and a large amount of time.
right,
Like
exactly.
that will
And
feed them
then
for a long time. Yes.
and when you and if you take that a step further, is you also have to understand that once you harvest the actual meat, the consumable portion of that, is there's also an additional factor in that, which is thinking about everything else. We talk about bones and hides and all this other stuff that become usable in the form of whether it's textiles or clothing or whatever that looks like, that they, as you said, nothing's going to waste because everything has been found to be a resource of some sort that becomes useful to the people over there, for all levels of not only survival but daily life and health and all these other things that again is just oftentimes just misconstrued. And when you get back to the portion of, like you said, like, hey, do we get to potentially keep the head and the antler or whatever to bring back, like that becomes the only portion of the hunt as far as like a memory and pictures that you get to actually maintain or keep or have a reference to. Because all of for me, like I think of that in terms of hunting here, right? I've never eaten horns. They're really tough, right? And my sole purpose behind hunting is I want to we'll go twofold. Is
Yep.
number one, to get out into the woods and be with friends and stuff like that, and the experience to get away. But the only other purpose outside of that is to obtain and procure or harvest meat that I actually want to be able to consume, because it's part of, just me knowing that I've yet to see a recall on, Rocky Mountain elk that doesn't happen, right? Like not at your grocery store where the hamburger gets recalled, and you got to stay away from this and that because it was mass produced, where it's tainted and this and that. Like I like to be able to know where my food comes from, and if I have the ability to harvest it, then I know what I'm going to get, and I also have a greater appreciation for that, which most people are disconnected with if they don't.
Yeah. And man, you touched on basically the last piece kind of for me. Um, and I'll jump into that, but yeah, I'm just going to echo like we bring home, in some cases people are aware of it, right? We bring home mounts, right? And those mounts end up being a lot of people think of them, they're your trophy, right? But more so they're the experience, and you remember so much of that experience. But
The memory.
part of, yeah, it is the memory, but even, and I'll go back to that, but within the mount, I think people need to understand a portion of this too when we talk about, hey, it's not every piece of it is utilized. So I even want to talk about like what a mount looks like. So for me, we have done shoulder mounts, right? Shoulder mount is where you take essentially the hide from the shoulder all the way up until the nose, right? And you preserve that hide, and that hide gets sewn on, and it gets put onto a mount, right? And then the horns get integrated into the mount, and so you get basically from the shoulders to the head, right, of hide that you save as the hunter. But then you have this the entire back area, right? The back area of that hide, right? And so we can, like, I just want to touch on, okay, well, how do you use that? How are they using this? But man, hide is used in so many different ways in Africa. That I mean, just the simplest way to look at it is, guys, it gets converted into leather. And how many different utilizations do we have for leather? And if we're able to provide people that don't have the means of acquiring any piece of leather with leather, right? The guides a lot of times will take the unused leather home, they will tan it, and then they will turn around and they will sell it to then enhance again their selves and their economy, right? Or if they're not going to sell it, they may utilize it for other pieces within their home. whether that may that I mean you can turn your hides into simple rugs. A lot of what they live on in Africa at times is dirt,
Yeah.
right? So getting in and out of showers now, we have a rug, right? So it's such a I hope that I'm shedding some light on some different utilizations of African hunting and African game and
Right.
the harvesting of it that maybe some people weren't aware of. I hope that this helps a little bit, but there's so much utilization from it that helps with those people in need there
Yeah.
that comes from this. But um, progressing a little bit towards the trophy aspect of this, and this is the part that's if you're a hunter, you get it, right? Joel, you get it, right? You most of the trophies that I bring home, I don't do shoulder mounts much anymore. We have enough of them. Like I've done that. And there's as a hunter, you kind of transition in from this like you're excited, now you're a trophy hunter, now you're a harvester for meat, now you're an educator of hunter, and I feel and that's a lifespan of what the hunter goes through eventually, right?
Right.
And you can look at any uh, I've helped out with a little bit of the hunter education program here in Texas with a guy named Scott McClure, who's he's in charge of the hunter education program in Texas and nationwide. And so I've done plenty with hunter ed, and that's a standard, um, I guess, pathway that hunters go throughout their life is they
Yeah.
go through those different stages. And so we talk about, hey, we have people that are interested in trophy hunting and trophy hunting alone. Yes, you're right. That is what get people a lot of times interested in it, but they don't stay in that phase for very long. You really don't. You transition into this. Wait a minute. I get to take this, and then I also feed my family and I feed myself with this. Look, I grew up off of deer meat. Like I'm like you. We rarely went to the supermarket, as my son would call it. We rarely went to the grocery store to buy meat because we just had deer meat all the time.
Yeah.
And so I don't bring home the shoulder mounts a whole lot anymore. It's more of the European style, which is simply the skull and the horns. And for me, it's less about the size of the animal. It's less about, hey, did I make the record books? I mean, yeah, that's really cool. I mean, it is. It's a carrot on top to be able to say that or to experience something of that, you know,
Sure.
substance or whatever. But more so, I get to look at each one of those animals, and every time I've gone to Africa, my dad's gone with me, and my dad turns 80 this year, right? He'll
Yeah.
be 80. And I know that my time with him's limited. His
Yeah.
birthday's coming up here November 1st. So what are we planning to do? Well, what do we, my dad and I love to do together? Go to the woods, right? So
Yeah.
he's 80. Can he go big game hunting anymore? No, right? So what are we gonna do, man? We're gonna get a bucket. We're gonna walk out into the field, right? We're gonna put some beer in the bucket. We're gonna drink some beer, and we're gonna probably shoot dove. And you know what we're gonna do at the end of the day when we're done shooting dove is we're gonna gather them up. I'm gonna create an amazing rub. I'm gonna stick them into the air fryer, and we're gonna have dove for dinner for his birthday. And that's what we're gonna do for
Yeah.
his birthday. And so for me, I know that all of those animals that I've killed, I'll just say it, I've killed them, right? Those are all linked to time that I've spent with my dad, which is limited. And
Yeah.
it's
For
about
sure.
the experience, and it's about being able to enjoy time with your family, enjoy time with your kids. And I think in today's world, I mean, I'm a dad. Like I see it quite frequently. We're kids are striving for ways in which to interact with their parents because their parents are so busy with work or they're always on their phones. And I mean, that's a completely different issue, right? But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's an opportunity for my dad and I to spend time together in something that we both genuinely enjoy. And I've
Yeah.
learned so many lessons from my dad through through those experiences that have yielded me into some of the positions that I'm in today. And
Sure.
so it's the trophy piece of it. Look, I couldn't tell you how many inches the Impala is that's hanging in my guest room. I couldn't tell you how many inches the Warthog Tusk is that's hanging in my shop right now. And quite frankly, I don't care. But every single time I look at it, I remember the hunt that my brother and I took together in Africa, where we
Yeah,
tracked down through the riverbed and we had to shoot across the river at a group of warthogs, right? And then we took a boat across the river, and and so like I remember all
for
those things,
sure.
and that's and I mean, and it's instant, um, it's instant memories that are
Yeah, it's
positive memories,
reflection.
quality memories. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
that's
Well,
what the
and if you
trophy is.
watch one of our a couple of podcasts ago, we had Con Hornbeck on, and Con's owns Mission Taxidermy here in Colorado, and him and I met through. I believe we were at Full Draw Film Tour, and
Mhm.
it was interesting because it's the first time I've had a taxidermist on the podcast. It might be the last time. I don't know, but it was interesting to talk about, understanding like how he became or how he got to, get into taxidermy, which was a really interesting story. If you haven't watched that podcast, I'll put a link for it up there right now. Let's post production work there. And the the interesting part is like within all of that, as he kind of talked about um, what he views or how he kind of views his job. And I don't remember if he said it or if I said it. And I'm like, when you give someone, he was driving, and I believe a shoulder mount elk out to Missouri to a client. And I don't remember how all that worked out, but I was like, you essentially were delivering a memory back to that person, because every time that person sees that elk, they'll always have all of these other things that are associated with the experience of what that the symbol, the symbolism of what that actually means. And so to me, I'm the same way, where I don't, I've got a few horns that sit around my house. I have 0 mounts in my house, and the main reason is that, number one, I probably need to get a lot more animals down. Number one, I'll talk to a lot of my friends and they'll give me crap about that. Number two is that you know all of the things that I've done over the last like 15 to 20 years have been captured and recorded and cataloged on video and through imaging and pictures and all that other stuff. Because if we've killed a decent amount of elk in the last like 10 years, but none of that has been about like getting something to clear space in my house to show off. It's been about the experience of what that actual hunt was about, and then more importantly was the fact that we had success, which means that we also then had something to take home with us. And by taking home, I'm talking about the meat and being able to actually enjoy it for months and months to come, which is really what it's all about. So
Yeah.
super cool. It's crazy because we started this conversation where I wanted to kind of, touch on a couple of these things. And as I told you before we went on, I'm like, hey, let's kind of just allow, the conversation to navigate where it was. And when you brought up the safari hunt stuff, I was like, let's not miss the opportunity to talk about that. And I think it's really critical just in even how you kind of like set up how quickly you, I don't know if you had that like scripted in your head because you've done this before in terms of the kind of your 3 bullet points there, but I think it's super valuable to how you kind of rolled all of that out. And I think so. Number one, thank you for that. Number two, it leaves us a lot of space because the things that we want to continue to talk about, and I know that, we kind of mentioned this before we got on today. This is a textbook that's coming out that's going to be H3O driven.
Yeah.
It is actually out on Amazon right now. Mike Barnes, who some of you have seen and heard us talk about, if you've seen our Mountain Fitness podcast, this is about a 375-page book that is one of one. And Andy, myself, Mike, and some of our other staff members, we have been working like crazy to show why that separator, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, is not only a goal of ours, but a mission of ours in terms of showing you how and why and when and where and the things that you're doing from a physical perspective of preparation or lack thereof, and how it's going to affect you in terms of maybe creating, if I tie this back into our conversation, better memories,
Yeah.
better experiences, and all of the things that, realistically we talked about today, that are really not training related whatsoever. But what we want to do is try and provide people with the ammunition to better have those experiences. And not only that, take your dad's birthday coming up and things like that. It's like, I look at that and say, my goal is to be able to still get up into the high country for as long as I'm physically capable of doing it. And if I can
Yes.
help other people do the same thing, even if that means, hunting in West Texas and being able to still get up into a stand or whatever that looks like, right? That's kind of the way that we look at this. And there's some really, really cool stuff that we're getting ready to share. Andy has been working on crunching a ton of data. We've collected over 150, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood of simulated packouts at our
Yep.
Western Hunt Fest events with our friends Guy and Jeff and Efren, who've been growing that event. And we've been so fortunate to be a part of that. It's been absolutely amazing. But we continue to step up what that looks like. And the thing that we try and challenge people with, especially when we start talking about the training aspect as it relates to preparing for the rigors of the physical portion of getting into the high country and doing some of these hunts, is that we want to show you that there's always a rhyme and reason to the why factor and how you should be doing things in terms of your preparation. That mindless training does not give you meaningful results. Some of the stuff that you see out on social media, I don't like to name names too terribly, but most of you, if you have looked into or peeked into that space, I promise you one thing: if I can, really kind of put my stamp or put my foot in the ground, there is absolutely no one in the industry, as far as hunt prep and physical training, that is doing or producing or about to show you guys the things that we're gonna launch into the industry. No one else is doing it, and a big part of that is the work that Andy's doing. So I appreciate that, brother. I'm
Yeah.
excited because you and I have had a lot of conversations about the things that we're going to try and kind of dump out into the ether here pretty soon. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting. The work that Mike has done on this, as well as helped with other things that, we've all been kind of prognosticating on where this can go. And we're going to have some follow-ups with this. We're going to have another podcast. Andy and I are going to jump on a podcast soon, hopefully with a guy from Western Contours as well as Western Hunt Fest. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we've crunched. We're getting ready to drop some articles. We're getting ready to put out some research. And all of that is going to start really manifesting itself into showing you why that separator is going to really show you the difference between what we're doing as opposed to others in the industry, and most importantly, the people that we have involved, like yourself, that are making that how we're going to accomplish that. So I appreciate it, brother. I'm excited because it's going to be fun, and we might hurt some feelings. That's all right. It's going to be good.
That's okay. And man, I will say, with, without diving too deep into the data is really exciting for me. And as you know, and as you know, those listening probably have figured out, I sitting in the seat that I'm in, anytime that I can make some objective decisions based off of data, and I'm able to collect the data and then turn it into something that can inform the industry, that's what I get really excited about. And that's what a lot of the times we do within the lab setting here is we take an idea, we try to tweak it, we turn it into something better that can then feed our practitioners like yourself, Joel. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where the researchers sit within this. Um, but I want to say this to our viewers and to our listeners, that a lot of the information that's out there about hunting right now, right, is anecdotal, right? A lot of the training methods that are out there right now for hunting are are anecdotal, meaning they're not backed with any sort of
Yeah.
legitimacy. They're not backed with any sort of empirical literature. And the reason that they're not backed by any of that is because none of it's really been done. And that's what this team at H3O has been able to do throughout the last couple years, with the help of several other organizations that have allowed us to pair with them and then to collect data during their particular events.
Yeah.
And now that we've able to analyze this in a very methodical way, we're able to produce something that's of quality, right? If we are just if we're simply going to go off of intuition, if we're simply going to, don't get me wrong, intuition's good at times, right? But if we simply go off of intuition and maybe some theories that have governed other pieces of training in the past, it's gonna cause us to fall short
Right.
on the appropriate methodology of training hunters, right? Training outdoorsmen and outdoors women. And that's where H3O is advancing, right? It is a marathon, guys. It is not something that happens overnight, right? I mean, this podcast is the first podcast that Joel and I have been able to do, and we've been working together for what, probably over 2 years now.
Yeah.
But that's partly because, look, I don't want to talk about this stuff yet because it's not done. I don't want to publish something
Yeah.
about this because it's not done. I don't
Yep.
want to put information out there about how to train hunters because we don't know exactly how to do it yet. But now
Yeah.
we do. But now we
Yeah.
do, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's really exciting right now. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it. I'm going to save it for these upcoming events, and
For
I want to
sure.
save it for these articles that we're getting ready to send out. And essentially tease you guys and probe you guys to continue listening and to continue diving into what it is that we do at H3O, to where you can have some good informed quality training before you go out into the mountains, or
Yeah.
before you go out into the woods.
Yeah.
Joel, thanks so much for allowing this
We're
opportunity.
just getting started, brother.
I know it. I
two,
know it.
2 years in, and we're just getting started. And I think the thing that you touched on there that we'll kind of close with today is that
Sure.
it's super important for people to also understand that what you mentioned in terms of like before we put this stuff out, before we start writing about it or putting it whether it's on a web page or in a publication or so on and so forth, is a huge part of the education or the academic side of all of this is that in order for us to produce and like be able to really like plant our flag in the ground and say this we know to be true requires time, it requires collection, it requires a lot of very critical thinking, because if we get down to just the bare bones guerrilla kind of tactics of it, it's like we're going to go out and hike, we're going to freaking spend all day, we're going to have a pack on, we're going to do this, we're going to and then we're going to come back and I'm going to be out there X amount of days, and like that's just what I got to do. So I'm going to go put a pack on, I'm going to hike around all summer long, and then I'm just going to be ready to go out and hunt whenever it becomes time.
Doesn't
And
work.
like we look at that and we say, well, that might be all good and well, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
But our goal again is to be better than that, in a sense that there's an elevated or a higher perspective, view of that may get you so far, but our mission is to get you further. That may give you some success, but our mission is to create a higher level of success. And for success, I'm not talking about filling tags or whatever. It's about operating at a higher level. It's recovering better. It's being more prepared, and it's giving you the knowledge base that all this work that we are doing on our end of the fence, on our side of the fence, is to better give you that ammunition so that you're not just blindly, going out and doing mindless things. Again, I mentioned this before, and expecting meaningful results. And that is the biggest thing that I continue to harp on. And I see it a lot when we talk, Mike and I talk about this, in the Mountain Fitness podcast that we've done, where I'm like, if you just go out and do a bunch of hard crap every day, good for you. But hard is not always appropriate. And at the same time, if you're just randomly throwing things at the wall and hoping that that's going to help you, the odds are that you will have a margin of success. But our mission is to make sure that we're not just throwing caution to the wind and saying like, yeah, well, it's going to be hard. Let's just make people do a lot of hard crap today, and then hopefully it works. There's actually a rhyme and reason in the data collection and the science and understanding physiological adaptation, whether that is from a metabolic perspective or from a strength perspective or whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
That's our goal, is to create that type of higher level thinking that becomes inarguable because we've proven it. And that is what we are going to do.
Yeah, for sure.
So cool, brother. Well, I know you got other meetings coming up. I have other stuff as well coming up here in terms of some folks walking into my door. So we're going to pick up with this again. We probably going to have to change the title of this podcast slightly, but that's all right. Hopefully we can get the next one done before another year eclipses here. But we appreciate it, guys. I promise you, be on the lookout. We're going to start sharing a lot of this information here really, really super soon. We're going to have another follow-up podcast with Guy on Western Contours, hopefully here in November. And we hope that you'll go and check out Mountain Fitness Podcast. There's a ton of stuff in there. Andy is also pretty easy to find on social media and things like that. So go check him out. We'll make sure we leave the connectivity in there. We really hope that you'll like and subscribe to our page. We appreciate you tuning in today. And Andy, thanks again for coming on, man. It's always good to see your smiling face. Although the mustache is not at the level of when I saw you last.
No,
We'll yeah,
this department chair thing has made me become more professional.
That is such garbage. We'll work on that too.
We'll get it back. We'll get it back.
Yeah. So
hey,
I hope
thanks.
I hope you have a good weekend, brother. We'll talk soon, and thank you guys again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.